Multiplication roadblock, a common story with most students in our junior and middle school. Multiplication is often introduced as repeated addition, a simple idea that works well for whole numbers. But as students progress, they hit a major roadblock when they encounter fractions, decimals, and negative numbers. Suddenly, the repeated addition method doesn't seem to make sense. This leads to confusion, frustration, and a limited understanding of multiplication's true nature. Let's break down why this happens and how to shift towards a deeper understanding of multiplication as a transformation rather than addition. So, before you, we have a very simple example, a simple exercise 4 times 3. Students are happy to do it, they understand what it is. It is the four groups with 3 each which are to be added and can be modeled as seen here with these blue squares. So, we have these four groups 1, 2, 3, and 4, each having 3 squares in it, and it comes to be equal to 12. So, easily we can figure this out. 3 times 4, on the other hand, is 3 groups. So this time we have these 3 groups, and in each, now we have 4 elements. That also gives you the same result as 12. It also shows that multiplication is commutative. 3 times 4 is same as 4 times 3. Now, taking example of 2 times 5, the alternate method which we have learned, repeated addition, you could add 5 twice. 5 plus 5 is 10. So that is also perfect. We got this. So far, so good. Now, when it comes to half times half, now what? How do you make half a group of half the things? That itself is so confusing. And this is the major roadblock. Even with negative numbers, how do we do addition repeated negative number of times? That indeed is a roadblock for us. Now, the objective here is to help students understand multiplication deeply, right? Because these roadblocks, they frustrate and students lose the confidence. So now we have a very structured approach for multiplication. We'll take up these two difficult questions, which are how do we multiply fractions and how do we multiply integers, signed numbers, right? Because with repeated addition, we cannot really understand how do we do this one third and half times repetition or with negative numbers. Well, one thing is very clear at this stage, and that is it is time to learn new concepts. I hope you agree with me, right? So, what better? Let's learn a strategy that really works. So, how do we define this strategy? It is just from the basics, right? So, we have understood that multiplication isn't just, it works for natural numbers, perfect. As soon as we go to the other number systems, it fails miserably. And therefore, we have to look into alternate approach and the right way of doing things. So it is not just repeated addition, it's a scaling transformation. So when you multiply with something, it gets enlarged, right? It can shrink, it can even change the direction if you multiply by a negative number. So it is basically a transformation in true sense, right? So we'll now consider it to be a scaling factor. Scaling could be if a number is more than one, then of course by scaling you get enlarged, like in maps, right? Whatever you see in the map, actually it is thousands of thousands times greater or bigger or larger, depending on the scale. Perfect. So that is what we mean by scaling. The scaling could also be if that scaling factor is less than 1. That is where the fractions come, proper fractions as shown here. So it will shrink by that particular amount. So this is the concept, right? It's known to you, but how do we apply and solve a problem of this roadblock in multiplication is now getting clearer to you. That's so true, right? So are you there with me, right? So we see that scaling is a key for multiplication. Perfect. Scaling in itself has all these properties of reducing or expanding or flipping the number sign. And this can be applied to many real life situations. Great. Now, I've split it purposely into two groups because these were the two major roadblocks. So, one was with the fractions, where now you understand since we are multiplying by a number which is less than 1, we are going to get a smaller number, right? So, it's a dilation where there is shrinking. The other thing is with negative numbers. When you multiply, it's a scaling where things get reflected, sign gets changed, right? So the direction changes. So for any quantity, we have two things. One is the quantity itself, and second is the direction. So when you multiply by a negative quantity, the direction reverses. And that is how the sign changes. So, keeping these two things in mind, we will go step by step in understanding how do we multiply fractions and how do we multiply the integers, the signed numbers. Perfect. So, let's look into the scaling transformation first. Okay, great. So, to understand the complete concept of scaling, what I've done is our question was half times 1 by 3. So, what we have done here made it simpler. So, half of some other number instead of a fraction, we have taken 6. So, scaling really means that times over here is saying half of 6. Right? Do you understand? Half of 6. And the result is 3. Now, if this line from here to here is 6 units, right? If this is 6 units, then half of this line is going to be 3 units. That is the scaling factor. We will scale it by a factor of half, right? Now, since half is less than 1, we get a number which is smaller. Makes sense, right? Great. Now, here what we are going to do? Here we are going to do in the second example half of 1/3, right? So, to make it more clear, what I'll do is on a number line, let's take a unit which is, let's say, 1. So, 1/3 will mean we'll divide this into three equal parts, right? So, this becomes 1/3. So, if this is 0, that is 1. 1/3 basically is right there. Half of that, right? So we'll go just halfway, and halfway to this is 1/6. You get the whole idea. So it is half of 1/3, and that gives you a result of 1/6. It explains to you many concepts of multiplication of fractions, correct? And you see very clearly what is happening here, that we are multiplying the numerators together and we are multiplying the denominators together to get our result. And that is multiplication with fractions. Now, with this concept, you can easily multiply all the fractions, right? So multiply numerators together, multiply denominators together, get the result. And the visual representation of the same is before you. So when we say half times something else, it is half of that number, right? So that's what it is. So I hope this concept of scaling transformation is clear to you, right? In senior classes, we'll definitely call it transformation, right? So, so better to learn it now. Great. Now let's look into the integers, the signed numbers, right? Or multiplication with negative numbers. Great. So the thing was that we wanted to multiply what? We really wanted to multiply minus 2 times minus 3. This is what we wanted to do. Now, what we have done here is we are introducing you step by step understanding of what happens when we multiply with negative numbers. So, in the last example, we saw what is scaling transformation, correct? And now we will see how do we adjust the quantities and the direction. So both the things. So scaling part is basically adjusting quantities, right? So altogether, multiplication is adjusting quantity and direction in a very simple language, right? Definitely, repeated addition will not work in such cases. Great. So now we will try to show you multiplication of negative numbers from what you know, right? So, initially, when we started with three problems, you see, it was very easy to do 2 times 3, right? So, 2 times 3 was very easy, and all the students actually got this answer as 6. No problems. Now, what we do here, this is step 1, right? This is our step number 1. So, I've broken down into 3 steps. Second step, we'll do one by one change in sign. So now I'm changing only sign for the number 3, so that is minus here. Now minus really means that the direction reverses. So this means reverse direction. In fact, every time you multiply by a negative number, direction reverses, right? So here, instead of plus, since the direction has reversed, we should get negative 6. Makes sense? Because of minus 3, right? So now you know the third step. So third step should be what, right? So I'd like you to complete this step and then we'll go over these steps once again, right? So that brings me to the next final step of multiplying with integers. And I hope with this you're going to understand completely how quantities and directions should be taken care of in multiplication, right? Here is your full and final step. So these are the three steps we're talking about. And the very first one, when you do 2 times 3, we get 6. And when one direction is changed, one direction has been changed, 6 becomes minus 6. Now from here, we have one more change, so that will reverse, and what you get is plus 6. So now I hope you understand how in steps we can visualize that when we multiply with signed numbers, negative numbers, then every time a negative number is multiplied with, the sign changes, right? So let us consolidate this concept of multiplying with negative numbers. If we have some number represented by the arrow shown here, in that case, multiplying this number with negative 1 will actually keep the quantity, amount, or the value of the number same but change the direction. So it becomes kind of flipped like this. And so it gets a negative value. You understand? If the number here is n, it becomes minus n. So that is what it is. 6 became minus 6. And once again, when we multiplied by negative, it became plus 6. So I hope this concept of scaling, quantity, and direction is absolutely clear, right? So multiplication is, in fact, scaling, quantity, and direction. Perfect. So, with that, we understand the whole process, and I hope now you must be feeling very confident. So, the concept has been unlocked. Multiplication is more than just repeated addition, it's a structured way of scaling transformations, right? So the key words here are structured way of scaling transformations. So with that, now I think you are ready to solve even more difficult questions right there before you. So try to multiply these numbers minus one third by 9, 1 by 3 times minus half, minus 3 times half, minus 3 times minus 1, minus 3 times minus 2, and so on. Aha, so we finally got over it. So, call for an action. Write down your comments. So finally, we are breaking the myth that multiplication is just repeated addition. It is a structured transformation where scaling is involved and a change in direction is involved, right? So now, what do you think? Does this change how you see multiplication? Drop a comment and let's rethink multiplication together. Stay tuned for the next video where we explore multiplication with advanced perspectives. Like, share, and subscribe for more insight. Thanks a lot for your valuable time and all the best.